All right, let's jump right in, shall we? We're taking a deep dive into the book of Judges today, folks. Got all our sources right here, ready to dig into this, well, sometimes pretty intense book.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not. But it's packed with these crazy stories and characters. And for me, it really makes you think. Makes you wonder about, faith and leadership and all that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Judges really gives us this raw look at a pretty wild time in Israelite history. All these cycles of loyalty to God, then rebellion, and then boom, the consequences hit hard.
So right off the bat, we're after Joshua and the Israelites are in the promised land. Seems like, happily ever after, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But Judges tells a different story.
Yeah, what happened? Why wasn't it all sunshine and rainbows?
Well, they were supposed to drive out the Canaanites, completely. But that didn't quite happen. They ended up living side by side.
And that's where things get messy, I bet.
Oh, yeah. Big time. They started mixing, marrying Canaanites, picking up their customs, even worshiping their gods.
Which probably didn't go over too well with, the God they'd made a covenant with.
You got it. Judges makes it crystal clear. Straying from that covenant, it always backfired. Big time.
So this covenant thing, that's the key to understanding what goes down in Judges, right?
Totally. When they followed God's rules, things were good. But when they wandered off, bam, oppression, violence, chaos, the whole 9 yards.
And that's that cycle you were talking about, the sin and deliverance thing, like a broken record, huh?
Exactly. They'd fall into idolatry, get hammered by some neighboring nation, then cry out to God. God sends a judge to save the day, and then guess what? They do it all over again.
It's kind of fascinating in a frustrating way. You see this pattern, but then each judge, they're like these heroes, but they're all messed up in their own way. Doesn't exactly fit the Sunday school image, does it? Nope, not at all. And that's what makes Judges so gripping, These aren't perfect heroes, they're human, Brave, faithful, but they make mistakes, have bad judgments, sometimes even do some pretty awful things.
Which brings us to our first judge, Othniel. He seems like the poster boy. 40 years of peace after taking down Cush and Rashathaim. That's got to be some kind of record, right?
Yeah, Othniel, he's like the gold standard, strong leader, does what a judge should do. But then you've got Ehud. He takes a more, let's just say, creative approach to dealing with King Eglon of Moab.
Right, the left-handed assassin with the surprise dagger. And didn't the sources say Eglon was a rather large fellow? Makes the whole scene pretty intense.
Let's just say it wasn't your average diplomatic meeting. But hey, Ehud gets the job done, frees Israel from those Moabites.
Then there's Deborah, prophetess, the only female judge in the whole book. Teams up with Barak to take on Sisera, the Canaanite general. Talk about a power couple, right? For sure. And let's not forget Jael. She's got her own unique way of dealing with Sisera. Tent peg through the head while he's sleeping. Definitely a memorable moment in Judges.
Yeah, memorable is one way to put it. But it shows you, Judges comes from a rough time, lots of violence. And these stories, they can be disturbing, but they make you think about faith, leadership, and the consequences of choices. When good and evil, they get all tangled up.
Exactly. So we've got this pattern of sin, oppression, deliverance, and these flawed heroes stepping up, sometimes in pretty wild ways. But what's the point? What are we supposed to learn from all this?
Yeah, what's the message here?
That's where things get really interesting. When we look closer at these judges, their lives, their choices, it opens up all these insights into faith, leadership, being human, the whole shebang.
So maybe, just maybe, we can learn from their mistakes, their successes, and apply those lessons to our own lives, even though our world is, well, a little different from ancient Israel.
Precisely.
Right.
Because even though these stories are ancient, the themes, faith, doubt, compromise, courage, leadership, they're timeless. Part of being human, no matter who you are or what you believe. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into some of these, shall we say, less than perfect heroes. You got Gideon, for example. Talk about insecurity and doubt.
Oh,
right?
yeah, Gideon.
Yeah.
The guy who needs a whole series of signs from God, the fleece, the dew, all that. I mean, I get it. Sometimes you need a little reassurance.
Totally. And that's what makes Gideon so relatable. He's wrestling with his faith. He needs those very specific signs, almost like he's testing God's patience.
But God's like, all right, man, I see you. Let's do this.
Right. And the amazing thing is God meets him right where he's at, gives him the reassurance he needs. And in the end, Gideon steps up, leads the Israelites to victory over the Midianites.
So, a happy ending, sort of. But then there's Jephthah. His story takes a much darker turn. That rash vow he makes to sacrifice the first thing that comes out of his house if he wins the battle.
Yeah.
And it's his daughter, his own daughter.
Oh man, Jephthah's story. It's not just tragic, it's disturbing. It really makes you think about vows, about acting without thinking, about the whole idea of like human promises and God's will.
It's tough, right? He's trying to honor God, but the result is just, it's awful. Does it make you question, like, what it means to be faithful?
It definitely makes you grapple with the complexity of faith. There's no easy answer with Jephthah. It's not a simple story with a clear lesson. It's more like an invitation to wrestle with the tough questions, to look at how we make decisions, the human side of it, and how sometimes even when you think you're doing the right thing, it can go so wrong.
Yeah, and then there's Samson. The guy's got superhuman strength, but his weakness, women. It's like this crazy mix of amazing feats and just disastrous choices, and it all ends with Delilah and, well,
Samson, he's like the classic flawed hero. So much power, but reckless, impulsive, driven by his desires. His story is a warning, Unchecked desires, they can destroy you. You got to have wisdom, self-control.
And that seems to be a theme we see a lot. Power without wisdom, strength without integrity. It never ends well.
Absolutely. And it's not just individual flaws we're talking about here. Judges shows us the failings of Israel as a whole. There are some parts, some stories that are just, well, they show how bad things had gotten. Morally, I mean.
You're talking about the Levite and his concubine, right? I got to be honest, that one was hard to read. Just brutal.
Yeah.
The violence, the assault. It's sickening.
It's supposed to be. It's meant to shock you, to wake you up to the danger of turning away from God's law. This story shows you what happens when a society loses its moral compass. Just darkness.
And then what happens after? It's even worse. The tribe of Benjamin almost wiped out because of what they did. It's like, how could it get so out of control?
It makes you ask some really tough questions about justice, about holding people accountable. It shows how destructive tribalism can be, protecting your own, even when they've done horrible things. And it's a reminder that even within a chosen people, a community that's supposed to be set apart, there's still the potential for great evil.
So, flawed heroes. This cycle of sin and deliverance, and then this downward spiral, morally speaking. Where does it all go? What's the point of showing us all this?
The book ends on a pretty bleak note, The last chapters, they paint a picture of total chaos. No king, everyone doing whatever they want.
Yeah, it's a chilling ending. It's almost like a warning, isn't it? Like, this is what happens when there's no moral compass, no one to lead, no one to guide people back to God.
You got it. It doesn't end with a victory parade. It ends with a warning.
Right.
About what happens when you lose your moral grounding, when there's no strong leadership, when you walk away from that covenant with God.
But even with all the darkness, you still see glimmers of hope, moments of courage, faith, self-sacrifice. They shine through.
Oh, absolutely. Even when things are at their worst, God doesn't abandon his people. He keeps raising up leaders, even if they're flawed, to guide them back to what's right.
It shows you God can work through anyone, right? Even the most unlikely, imperfect people.
Exactly. And that's a message that runs through the whole book. There's hope. Even when we're broken, when we mess up, God can still use us to do his work.
Yeah. It's kind of reassuring in a weird way. Like, we mess up, we make bad choices, but there's still that chance to come back, to make things right.
Exactly. Judges shows us the dark side, no doubt. But it also shows us how powerful God's grace is, how forgiving he is. Even when the Israelites completely turn away from him, do their own thing, embrace all that bad stuff, he never gives up on them.
It's like this constant back and forth.
Yeah.
Between how weak we are, how prone to messing up, and God just being, well, God. Faithful no matter what.
I like that. It is kind of unsettling, makes you face your own, imperfections, but then it's also comforting, It tells you those mistakes, they don't have to define you. God's grace, it's always there, ready to pull you back when you're heading down the wrong path.
So, okay, we've spent all this time in ancient Israel with these battles and these judges, but what does it mean for, us? Today, it's a different world, right?
Oh, I think it's more relevant than ever. The power of judges, for me, is how it makes you look at yourself, your own life, your choices, like holding up a mirror.
When you think about it, we've talked about how flawed the judges were, but don't we see that all the time today? Leaders, politicians, even religious leaders, they all mess up. So how do you figure out who to trust, who to follow?
It's a question people have been asking forever. I think Judges tells us to look deeper, Look at their character, not just how charming they are or how powerful. It's about integrity, humility. Do they really care about serving others?
And what about those times when, we're in a judge moment? A tough decision, you know it's wrong, but it's easier to just take the shortcut. How do you avoid that? How do you find the strength to do the right thing, even when it's hard?
Well, look at the judges. What do their stories tell us? First thing, stay connected to God. Be grounded in His Word. Ask for His guidance. When you drift from that, it's so easy to get lost.
Like that cycle in Judges, right? They turn away from God, things go bad, but then they cry out to Him, and He always helps them.
Exactly. And that's the hope that runs through the whole book.
Yeah.
You can screw up, make bad choices, but God's love, His mercy, it's always there. He's waiting for you to come back, to get back on track. And then He can use you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling, honestly, thankful. Thankful that these stories are so real, so honest, that these flawed heroes, their successes, their failures, they teach us so much. And thankful for the reminder that even when things look bad, chaotic, God's still there. He's still working, still wants us to be part of making things better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to everyone listening out there, take these stories with you. Remember what we've learned from them. Think carefully about your choices. Ask God for wisdom, for guidance. And never forget, His grace is powerful. It can change you. It can change the world, even when things seem broken.